Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will get started here in just a moment while we wait for folks to be admitted. Before we get started, please tell us what state you're joining us from in the chat box so we know who's with us here today. Great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Manufacturing Our Way into the Future. My name is Emily Mayer, a policy associate in NCSL's Fiscal Affairs program. I will be introducing the webinar and providing some housekeeping notes before turning it over to our moderator and our speakers. Today's webinar platform is for an information exchange and engagement. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat and Q&A boxes. The Q&A box allows for upvoting, so please ask you to put your questions for today's speakers using the Q&A option. You can use the chat box for general questions regarding today's webinar or to connect with other attendees. To familiarize yourself with the chat function and to learn who's online today, if you haven't already, please put your state that you're tuning in from today so we learn who's on here today. We will hold a formal Q&A after our presenters are finished presenting. The webinar platform we are using is optimized use for Google Chrome. While other web browsers such as Firefox may work, we recommend anyone experiencing technical difficulties to try transitioning over to Chrome instead. If you continue to have technical issues, please email registration@ncsl.org, where our team is ready to assist you. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to NCSL's webpage in the coming days, along with any PDF slides within the next week. So please feel free to visit our webpage if you do want to reference our resources. Now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let's get back to why we're here today. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted industry outlooks and operations. American manufacturing faced changes to supply chains, trade, and production lines. Yet despite these challenges, manufacturing has been a pillar of support for the public health response and economic recovery. Today, we're here to discuss the changes and the future of manufacturing and learn how state lawmakers can best assist manufacturers. And to do that, we have a great lineup of speakers for you all here to listen to. Joining us today as our moderator is Mark Tropy, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, where he's worked for the last 4 years after a 25-year career in federal service at the U.S. Departments of Labor and Commerce, NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Mark works extensively with state and local economic development leaders on issues of advanced manufacturing, economic development strategy and practice, international engagement and innovation. Then we will hear from our first speaker, Dr. Tom Kurfus, who currently serves as the Chief Manufacturing Officer at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. During 2012 to 2013, he was on leave serving as the Assistant Director for Advanced Manufacturing at the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President of the United States of America, where he was responsible for coordinating federal advanced manufacturing R&D. He was president of SME in 2018 and currently serves on the Board of Governors of the ASME. His research focuses on design and development of advanced manufacturing systems, targeting secure digital manufacturing, additive and subtractive processes, and large-scale production enterprises. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and is a fellow of ASME, AAAS, and SME. Following Dr. Kurfus, we'll hear from Dr. David Boulay, president of the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center, a public-private partnership committed to driving growth through enterprise excellence. With over 20 years of experience, in manufacturing, university, and nonprofit settings. He brings a diverse blend of expertise in performance management, small business development, and organizational growth strategies. Dr. Boulet's team also recently launched a virtual book, Made in Illinois, a modern playbook for manufacturers to compete and win. Lastly, but certainly not least, is Senator Susie Gloriak Hilton, who will share her insights on what the Illinois legislature is doing to support manufacturers in her state. Senator Gloriak Hilton is the chair of the Illinois Senate Committee on Commerce. She also has a mechanical engineer trade background and a master's in manufacturing engineering. To our speakers and attendees, thank you so much for joining us here today. Mark, the floor is now yours.
There we go. Thank you, Emily, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about one of my favorite topics, changes in manufacturing. I spent a total of 15 years working around manufacturing with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership at the Commerce Department. And I was a psychology major as an undergraduate, did liberal arts studies, and I love to talk about manufacturing once I started to work in that arena because it touches so many topics that are incredibly interesting. I mean, when you think about it, logistics and supply chain, international trade, the latest in new technologies and innovation, workforce issues, very relevant to manufacturers, entrepreneurship. And so you got to touch a lot of different things and all impacted on manufacturing. So it was very interesting for that reason, and because manufacturing constantly is going through so much change. And that certainly is true today as we've come through the pandemic over the last 16 months or so and are emerging from that and trying to move into a recovery phase here. And so I couldn't be happier than to have the panel that we've got here today and to be able to turn it over to Dr. Tom Kurfus, who you heard a little bit about his background moments ago. He's a tremendous practitioner and observer of manufacturing. So we'll start off with Tom and then turn it over to our other two panelists to help us make sense about all these changes in the manufacturing sector. So Tom, love to hear from you.
Mute. There we go. I couldn't find, I have all these different screens going on over here, and I will turn my camera on as well. Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with the overall group today. We have sort of a similar type of title for my particular talk, Manufacturing the Future. And it's really, it's one of these punctuation things, right? So you take a look at it and you say, well, and I'll tell you, this is my kids always told me this. They said, punctuation can save your life. Certainly manufacturing can, but punctuation can save your life. You could think about it, as let's eat grandma or let's eat grandma. And here we're talking about manufacturing the future or manufacturing the future. Either way you look at it, it is really about ensuring both prosperity and security for the United States of America. I'd first of all like to just kick off and thank some of my colleagues, the good doctors Feldhausen, Salibi, and Paki. These are my number of my engineering staff over at Oak Ridge National Laboratory who have expertise in hybrid, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, digital and secure manufacturing, and then a lot of the analytics, the AI applied to advanced manufacturing. And of course, special thanks to the Department of Energy. Oak Ridge National Laboratory is a national lab. We are funded by the Department of Energy. Our unofficial mantra is innovating faster than the competition can copy. And really the idea is, look, people will take your technology, they will copy it, and they will run with it all over the world. And what you need to do is stay one step ahead of them. And you can see that both from an economic perspective as well as a national security perspective. And really our vision, and again, we are a national lab, it's rapid innovation, ensuring U.S. dominance in advanced manufacturing. I will show you at the end of my slides, you'll see my friend Medusa over here. This is a 3-robot additive system. It uses TIG welding, so it's a regular welding. Each one of these robots is a welding system, and then we have a rotary table down here. So instead of printing plastic, we're printing steel or titanium or whatever we might be putting out in terms of our weld systems. But really what we're all about is identifying and scaling up new critical technologies for emerging advanced manufacturing sectors. And the other really key point here is it's also about integrating. So we work closely with industry partners to really scale this up. So let me talk a little bit about digital and so forth, and then we'll talk a little bit about hybrid, and I'll loop it back into some of the things that have happened with the COVID-19 situation, and then we'll step back to what I would say is a little bit of a bigger picture. So really sensing and big data and AI, they're everywhere now. Even the embedded computers. You've got the Arduino over here. Which one's the Arduino? That's the, no, this is the Arduino over here. The Raspberry Pi, if you have kids in junior high or high school, they're using these computers. The Arduino is, I don't know, $10, $15, has more power, more capability than what we used to put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. They only had 8K of RAM, not 8 gigabytes, not 8 megabytes, but 8 kilobytes of RAM. And so you could imagine that this is just everywhere. They're low cost, they're relatively disposable. They're sort of like your mobile phone. If you drop it, if it's a couple of years old and you drop it, you probably don't get it repaired. You probably just trade it in and you get a new one that is faster, better, and probably cost you less money to purchase the new version of it than to try and repair the old one. But this also allows for rapid upgrades. So again, this moves us towards this ability to really innovate faster than the competition can copy. We're always upgrading. And of course, sensors. And so there are just a bunch of sensors out there that are really, they're just everywhere. I mean, you can see I'm talking to you, I've got a camera going on right now and so forth. And that's just, I don't know, maybe $50, $60, $70, where maybe 10 years ago it would have been $1,000. So it's amazing how rapidly things are moving forward. And so what we look at is really connecting our machines up. And so in this particular case, we have smart machines, but these are machines that you would buy in your plants. So these are machines even 3, 4, 5 years old will have this capability to connect up to the network. It's a little bit of a different approach to things. So we connect them up the network through a backbone. And again, one of the things I want to caution is cybersecurity. I think with a lot of the more recent issues with ransomware and so forth, I caution you when you do connect up your machines, and I think you really have to in order to compete. And again, just think about how your life would be if you didn't have your smartphone, right? So you are connected up, but when you connect up these machines, make sure you do it in a cyber secure fashion and really work with, there are a variety of entities out there, manufacturing institutes like the new Cybersecurity Manufacturing Institute that can really help you to make sure that you're secure. But then you plug into the cloud. And look, people are familiar with the cloud. They all have their photos stored off on the cloud. They have Google Drive and Microsoft Azure. And so you're using this very much on a daily basis. And we can tie all of our machines in along these lines. And some of the things that you might do, and it's relatively straightforward, is just, look, my machine, the spindle is spinning, I'm making a part. And so we actually, when it's not spinning, I'm not making a part. And so we work with a number of companies that make turbine blades and maybe just one-off turbine blades. They said, well, we don't really know how long it takes us to make a turbine blade. So we monitored, hey, machine is spinning, we're making the blade. Machine's not spinning, we're not making the blade. This is how long it takes you to make the blade. And so we could average that over years and over several years and figure out, oh, what's the average and standard deviation for those production cycles. The other thing actually I noticed is I said, oh, hey, look at this. This is the setup time for this blade because we're setting up the machine for the next blade. When we analyze those, we find that the setup time is all over the place. It's not very consistent. And of course, what you learn, hindsight is 2020, is if this blade and this blade use a lot of the same tooling, it's a very small setup time. If they use different tooling, it takes longer to set up. Now, this is something that we know, it's not a new idea, but again, it's just a fresh view of this, and the companies that were producing these blades hadn't really thought much about it. So again, it just gets you thinking. And by the way, if you can't connect your machine up, let's say it's a legacy machine, maybe it's 20 or 30 years old, we can buy a little accelerometer that sits inside, it's the same one as that sits inside your phone for a couple of dollars, put it together in a smart sensor package that's wireless and so forth that can do the same thing. Machine vibrating, I'm making my part. Machine not vibrating, not making my part. And by the way, you put all this stuff in a box and so forth. The most expensive part about that smart sensor is the box that it goes in. Not the processor, not the memory, not the Wi-Fi, not the sensor itself, it's the box. So again, just sort of to calibrate you, it's a box that we're dealing with. Let me talk a little bit about hybrid manufacturing. Well, we'll touch base in terms of what this meant from a COVID perspective. But again, so hybrid, you think about additive, and I print out different layers, but you can see the stair stepping. And so instead of printing out on a separate machine, if we're printing in a machine tool like we are here, we can actually print out a part and then machine it down to the final shape. So here we're printing this propeller and we're machining it to the final shape to get a very nice looking part. And there's a lot of things that you could do with hybrid, and I'm not going to get too much into it right now. But even when you start to talk about a 5-axis machine tool, well, now I can rotate this part. So if you think about support structures, if I wanted to build something that looks like this, I don't need to support this down here like I would in just a regular old printer that you might have at home. I can print in this direction, rotate it 90 degrees, and print again. And so that works out really well. In terms of the printing, we may either send wire in, or we may actually blow powder in, but we have a laser, and the laser melts the metal and deposits it on the workpiece. Now, what's great about this is it allows us to do some amazing things. So this is just an example from one of my colleagues off on the West Coast, Professor Yamazaki. Here we had a part made out of Inconel. If you're familiar with Inconel, it's a nickel-based super alloy. It's good at high temperatures and so forth. We use it in turbines. The problem is it's very hard to machine, and it's also very expensive. So in this particular case, you really only needed to have this super great alloy in certain areas. So instead of making the whole part out of this alloy and machining a bunch of it away and making chips and generating scrap that we would have to recycle, we actually started off with a stainless steel base and then just printed the material where we needed it, and then did a little bit of machining to finish it up. So again, it saved us a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of precious material. In this particular case, Inconel. So if we take a look at this, we also do think a little bit differently. You think your 3D printer, well, hey, I slice it up, I'm going to print layer by layer. But if you're producing something on one of these rotary systems, I've got to slice it up in a radial fashion, in a chordal fashion. And here you can see we printed this particular one up in a very similar fashion here. So you can see we're printing and we're actually rotating as opposed to going, just doing an XY move. And so we're printing this propeller in real time. Now this is a simulation, but here's the actual propeller that we printed. And you have to think about other things like, on the inside corner, I have to put less material down and so forth. So it is really a different way of thinking about things. Now, let me shift gears a little bit in terms of just thinking about things that are different. In terms of some of the things that we did at Oak Ridge National Laboratory for COVID-19. So a lot of the N95 material where you needed face masks and so forth, or actually, I'm sorry, for face shields. So here is, and I will show you some of these, we actually printed these molds out and then we machined them down to our target size. So these are for face masks and headsets and so forth, 4 injection molding machines working with the Tennessee version of FEMA and so forth, and actually also with FEMA to make sure that we could start to produce them. I mean, it was great that people were 3D printing these masks out of plastic, but really what you want to do is to be able to print a digital version of the part and really get of the mold. So I can start to injection mold thousands and tens of thousands of these. The other ones that we looked at were test tubes. It turns out that they needed test tubes with screw-on tops for all the testing. We worked with companies like Coca-Cola. Turns out if you take a look at a 1 or 2 liter bottle preform for Coke bottles, it's exactly what the test tube looks like with the little screw on top. And so we worked with Coca-Cola and Densa, which is an automotive supplier here in Tennessee, to build the right either to use the current Coca-Cola bottles or to design new injection molds for the injection molding machine, so we could pop out millions of these test tubes. N95 material. We have the carbon fiber technology facility where we're producing carbon fiber. We worked with Cummins Engine. We converted our carbon fiber plant into an N95 material production plant. And then we worked with Cummins. They make engines, but the key thing is they have companies that make air filters for their engines and oil filters for their engines. So we worked with them to convert those filter plants into N95 material plants. And then, of course, that allowed us to make to ship that material out to make masks and so forth. So amazing things. I'll just show you a few of them. So here's just the face shield where we wanted to make the top part of the face shield. So this is just a CAD model of that face shield. Here is the actual mold. So these are injection molds, and we printed them out and then we machined them down. And then here's the final product where you actually had the clip for the face shield, that people were using. So it really worked out quite well. And again, the idea was to use the latest and greatest technology to move that product forward. That's what we're all about. How do we get a product moving forward? And what we're thinking about is, look, how do we keep a digital warehouse of this information? And when we need it, we can deploy it to our production operations across the country. And there are lots of machines that can do this. They don't have the additive capability, but they certainly have the subtractive capability. And there are a lot of different parts you can make in terms of subtractive machining. So let me just talk a little bit about some of the advanced things that we're starting to look at. So when you 3D print, one of the issues that you do have is it does get hot. And so we're now monitoring with a thermal camera. So how do I take an older machine tool? It's not really older. I mean, it's a machine tool that's out there, but integrate extra sensors like a thermal camera. Well, you do that using the cloud. And so we just have a PC that's monitoring this camera. And the PC basically says, hey, print the next layer. And it just says, okay, when it cools down, print the next layer so you don't get too hot. And we can actually monitor this, right? And you can see here, so here now you can see some 3D printing. These are our IR cameras, infrared. And you can see that as we're printing, this starts to tip over so that we can actually print that special cup that we had. And we can actually measure this while it's cooling down. And you can see it actually, this is the distortion while it cools down. So you can see the part changes shape as it's cooling down. Now, one of the things you want to notice is to say, hey, well, all right, I want to make sure that it doesn't get too hot. So in this particular case, hey, we're printing just as fast as we can. You can see we get a pretty ugly looking part. It's just supposed to be a little bit of a wall. Here, what we've done here is we have a camera monitoring this, and it says, okay, if this is getting too hot in here, hold off on printing the next layer. And so you can see that actually the delay time goes up as we print more and more layers. We have to wait more. So here's it right at the start of the printing. Yeah, now it's getting hotter and hotter. And so we're cooling it, we're slowing it down. Now, from a production perspective, slowing down is never a good thing. So one of the guys decided over here, so they said, well, look, if this one gets too hot, then let's go print this one. So now we're printing 2 parts at the time. The machine is 100% utilized. So some really good stuff that's going on. And what this allows you to do is really connect everything together digitally. You can produce a part, you know that it's a good part. When it shows up at the customer, it says, yes, this part was made correctly. It's a genuine part. And you can also help produce it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of ride share. So you take your Uber, right? So when I am at the airport and I want to take my Uber ride home, what do? Well, I bring up my app and it connects me with the supplier. And so a lot of these companies now are looking to say, hey, let's say I'm General Motors and I need 500 parts. Well, let me connect you with somebody who can give you those 500 parts. Okay, so you can do that. But what instead if they would connect you with 50 companies, small mom and pop shops locally that could make 10 parts, and you could do that in the next 6 hours. So now GM could get their 500 parts in 6 hours. And they show up with a digital passport. Just like when I get in my Uber, it pops up the map and I know that I'm not being taken for a ride. This is what it's going to cost. Here's how I'm going to go. And then the last thing that happens is that Uber driver they need to know how to drive a car, but Uber is showing them how to go using real-time feedback and sensors and so forth. And that's the same thing with these machine tools now. Hey, GM needs these parts. Here's how you make the part. They have the recipe for it. You just need to load the part in, load in the tooling and so forth. So humans are very important here. We're not replacing the humans, but we're augmenting the humans, to basically say, hey, this is a better capability. We are going to allow you to work on things. We're going to help you out, show you what to do here, and leverage that human capability. So now it's really hard to beat. You're going to use point of assembly manufacturing. Even going one day away in terms of transport is very difficult because GM can get these parts in just a few hours. And by the way, if GM's one big supplier has a problem, a power outage or something we see in COVID, they're in big trouble. But if one of those 50 shops goes down, I still have 49 others. So this gives me a really resilient workforce. Before my last slide, I just want to point out, look, people are not going away. They're always worried about automation. When am I going to lose my job? I was testifying in front of Congress not too long ago, and somebody said, well, when's the robot I'm going to get the robot to empty my dishwasher. I thought it was just absolutely perfect. robot, they struggle to get a robot to put a peg in a hole. I mean, robot is great and it augments humans, but I would never let a robot handle my fragile dishes and so forth, and even try and stack a dishwasher. We've gotten rid of the nasty job of washing dishes, but loading, unloading, inspecting the plates. Hey, did it get cleaned off? Do I need to pre-rinse it, pre-wash it, and so forth? That's all something that people do really well. We're just offloading the heavier responsibilities. So I'll just wrap up over here with sort of a bigger picture. And here's my friend Medusa. So you can see the three robots operating here. Here they're operating together. The turntable is going and they're putting material down. Here they're operating independently, and they're just going to be looping through here. But basically, all this digital thread, this is getting information out to the machines, and it's also getting information back. So when that turbine blade shows up at the Fort Worth assembly facility for the F-35, that turbine blade comes with all the digital information that was used to make that blade. It's genuine, it was made correctly. And with things like augmented reality, virtual reality, or we might even say extended reality, we are leveraging our experienced workforce. You don't want to sort of drive down to the lowest cost, cheapest workforce. You want to take, we're not a cheap workforce, but let's leverage that. Let's really make use of it. It allows us to deploy both technology, process, and product faster than the competition can copy. It leverages the cloud. Look, we already live in the cloud. We're very familiar with it. We can use it. We just have to make sure that our workforce can really make use of it, both on the compute, communicate, and storage part. Do not forget, please do not forget, and at some point in time, I'm super happy to come back and talk about cybersecurity. I am the Chief Manufacturing and Energy Officer for the new Cybersecurity Institute. It's really important, and there are several things that you can do to make sure your operations are safe. But you can also use this type of security to protect both proprietary and classified information, which is just so important to the prosperity and national security of this nation. But really what it comes down to me is supporting these small and medium-sized enterprises, which ultimately are representative of the middle class. So this is how the middle class survives, at least in manufacturing, because we make them invaluable. We can really leverage them and so forth. But I will close with this statement from my favorite 20th century philosopher, and this really gets back to the workforce. And this is a person by the name of Eric Hoffer, and he said back in the 20th century, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And this goes towards, look, think about it. You're in the workforce for 50, 60 years now. Think about what technology looked like 50, 60 years ago. If you do not keep your workforce up to date, you're just not going to be able to compete. Yes, it's the next generation workforce, but it's also about the current generation workforce. Thanks very much for your attention.
Wow, thank you, Tom. I feel like you touched an awful lot of bases in a very short time. So thanks for giving us that overview. We would next like to go ahead and turn it over to Dave Boulay with the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center. So Dr. Kurfus gave us this really big picture snapshot look at some of the exciting new technologies and some of the implications of those technologies. Dave Boulay brings us a perspective from the front lines, working with those small and mid-sized manufacturers that you heard Dr. Kurfus mention just a moment ago, and helping them deal with the challenges and the opportunities that come with these new technologies and all the other forces that Tom alluded to in his presentation. So Dave, can you take us down to the front lines for a little while?
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And really, it is a fantastic title, Manufacturing Our Way to the Future, given that manufacturing is such a pillar for our economy, always been a leader, helping us through economic and societal difficulties and leading the way, as you saw with all of those technologies that Tom shared. And, across the United States, I think it's good to anchor ourselves for a minute that all of our states, about 99% of the manufacturers are small, mid-sized manufacturers. They're locally owned. They're in the rural communities. They're in the urban communities. They're the innovators. They're job creators. And so as we're thinking about policy to facilitate a strong manufacturing sector, and as Tom noted, really ensuring that we keep a strong industrial base, these small and mid-sized manufacturers are just vital for all of our communities. And I am going to share a little different lens as our role here in Illinois as part of the U.S. Department of Commerce Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or MEP for short. We have an opportunity to be on site pre-pandemic and certainly back again, but on site in depth with companies. And it gives us a little unique lens. And for perspective, about 700, 750 companies a year in Illinois, we're doing something on site with this company to help them be more competitive. And I want to share that from that lens, just more what we saw with the pandemic, and to help us think through that as I think it'll start to weave into some of the technology pieces. And as we know, when the pandemic hit, the lay of the land changed immediately, right? It was shelter in place. Yet manufacturers were deemed essential and continued operations. And we're trying to navigate the day-to-day, like trying to keep their workforce safe, fulfill societal needs with what we're shifting demands. And just even early on, just some interesting notes. I'll take food manufacturing as the example. Some food manufacturers that we know and work with, their main products are for the center of the store in the aisles. Those companies in the early part of the pandemic were booming, could not keep up, could not find enough workers. They were really challenged, while other food manufacturers that were more attuned to food service, say restaurants, were wondering when the next purchase order was going to come, all in the same idea of food manufacturing. So it was a very different time where we're seeing there's various angles to how the pandemic was playing out. But as we navigated through the past year, as companies, public leaders, families, and individuals, it certainly required a fundamental approach. And that approach really about resilience, or our ability to recover quickly. And so when we looked at the resilience of this past year, we really have been facing something that our generation not experienced. It's created a crossroad moment for how we support and strengthen manufacturers. In our organization, when we approached the pandemic going back March 2020, we put on this resilience framework to do our job and to serve. And that framework, at a very high level, we looked at how do we help companies respond? How do we help them recover? How do we help them rebound? We focused our action in these phases. And as I reflect back on the past year plus, I think it's a solid mental model to share a few observations. So going back a little bit. So we go back to March through, say, May or June of last year. It really was a respond phase. And one of our responses was to put up a helpline. Companies were looking they just needed answers. They just needed solutions now because there is the fog of the situation. And in this helpline, constant sets of questions about health and safety of the workforce. What are the guidelines? What are the legal questions about dealing with the workplace and dealing with some of the real fundamentals about making sure that, well, manufacturers were essential. How do they do it, and do it in a way that's functional for the individuals? Simultaneously, in our state, and I think like many states, the governor had created an essential medical equipment task force to help secure the needed supplies in response. And we were part of that task force. And in fact, our role was to help manage the database and vet the suppliers. And within about 2 or 3, well, it's almost 4 weeks, I guess, but about 4 weeks, we had over 1,000 manufacturers and distributors answer the call for ventilator parts, gowns, gloves, masks, that we could help sort, filter, and organize to get to the right agencies and help get to the right responses. From the response came more of the recover phase. And at some angles, I think this phase is still continuing, but it really started perhaps back last June and in earnest through the summer, fall, and into December. It's important to note that I think for other sectors, it's also a very different mode of recovery. I'm referencing manufacturing. This was very much about, I've made it, our company's stable, and now we need to shore up and make sure that we can ensure the sustainability of what we've stabilized. And that helpline turned into financial questions around PPP, questions around stimulus, and just cash flow sorts of questions, understanding the changing guidelines in health and safety, and understanding also the not only how can I get answers to my questions, how can I step up and help deal with the pandemic as a manufacturer. We also started to watch the longer term implications for workforce safety, the idea that portions of the workforce are remote, staying remote, the essential workers had to show up every day. What did that mean as far as the longer term operations, everything from the communication patterns to the use and decisions around technology. And then during this time period, we also saw the beginnings of supply chain issues. And they were more at the time, I would describe them as episodic disruptions to the supply chain due to supplier closures or buying habits. Toilet paper was flying off the shelf. We had some meat plants that were shutting down temporarily due to COVID outbreaks. All of these creating these episodic moments of the supply chain. And here, as we're kind of easing out of the recover and into the rebound, the questions around how do I ensure a vaccinated workforce, again, make sure the long-term safety and health of the workplace, and make sure that we are getting our workforce vaccinated or access to the vaccines. And then that final phase of this has been about rebound. And it really started last July for manufacturers, and it's still in some ways going kind of overlapping this recover. And after that initial shock, manufacturing has been an incredibly strong sector. As we've been buying things instead of going on vacations, it has been a bit of back to business with certainly a twist or many twists. Questions around how do we do virtual selling? How do we start thinking about technology investments and start thinking about the technologies such as Tom's reference, and what does that mean now that it might not have thought about, say, in 2019. Establishing new rules for the workplace and guidelines for how we work and operate that are going to be used for the long haul. During this period since last August, we did a very brief needs assessment here in Illinois with and we've had over 2,000 manufacturers respond to this. It's 5 minutes on the key drivers of business and what are their priorities and over the next 6 months, over the next year. And what came out of this, or what's been coming out of this, is number one, the growth of the business. Number two, the workforce skills. Number three, health and safety. Number four, leadership. And when you look at how these weave together for the drivers of the business, you know that part of the solution sets come into decisions that we'll make with policy, decisions that we make with upskilling, and decisions that are made with technology. I know we'll get into this a little more with supply chains because it is an important topic, but we have also witnessed where those episodic situations extended into longer term problems with supply chains. It's as if the pandemic has taken out all the slack of the supply chains, and any vibration that is happening in the vibration is resulting in delayed orders, resulting in the inflationary prices. And more in the news, we hear about semiconductor, but it's not just semiconductors, it is steel. I was just talking with someone probably 2 weeks ago, it's garlic of all things. So it's really across the board that we're seeing these supply chain vibrations and challenges that we face. I think we still have much to figure out. This rebound is going to take quite a while as we settle down supply chains, understand the new look of the workforce and the way we decide to invest in technologies. I'll wrap up my comments with the idea that this resilience framework may be a handy guide. Certainly it's a handy guide to think about any crisis, whether it be a pandemic, a localized natural disaster like flooding, cyber attacks, cyber issues, and our thinking around policy and actions in these phases of respond, recover, rebound may be a good guiding principle as we think through these phases and how we support with policy. I think the other part that I reflect on is whether it's been the Apollo program or the speed at which the COVID vaccine and the distribution of the vaccine has occurred, that this country just has proven our ability to reach ambitious goals. And when you look at those big societal ambitious goals and reflect on the moment, it's vital that our policies adjust and facilitate really not only the resilience for manufacturing, as we have learned over the past year, in the crisis, but also with those policies, how we ensure that we grow and prosper going forward. With that, Mark, I will turn it back to you.
Well, Dave, that makes for a terrific segue to our next speaker, Senator Gloriak Hilton, also from Illinois. As you mentioned, Dave, the importance of listening to the big picture that we heard initially from Tom, and the frontline view that we just heard from you is that we've got a lot of policymakers on the call today. And so we want to think about how you take that information and what happens in the legislative front that can help to support and promote and reduce risk for manufacturers who are trying to do the right thing. So we're very pleased to have the senator with us today to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what you've seen in Illinois, and maybe to provide some guidance for others about what they might consider moving forward.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And it was great to watch Tom's slides. Who doesn't love to watch robots work? I'm glad that I didn't have to go after those cool slides. And I did appreciate Dave's talking about resilience. That's really one of the most important things that, the manufacturers can have right now because of all the changes with COVID. But I want to really thank you for inviting me to speak with you all today. So as Mark said, I'm Susie Gloriak Hilton, and I'm the state senator from the 24th district. So the 24th district represents a large portion of DuPage County, which is west of the city of Chicago, and a small section of the Cook County suburbs of Chicago. So as they mentioned earlier, I studied mechanical engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology here in Illinois. And then I continued my studies with a master's degree in the field of manufacturing engineering at Northwestern. So besides my duties as a state senator in Illinois, I currently work as a forensic mechanical engineer, and I investigate industrial accidents. So I do oftentimes go into manufacturing plants to look at what's happened. But way back in the 80s, I started my career in manufacturing, and I worked as a production and capacity planner at a company called Belden Corporation. And Belden at that time was manufacturing cords, electrical cords, cable, and magnet wire. But my job was to coordinate with the marketing department to help forecast and plan future production in the plants. So I learned about forecasting and market fluctuation. So I'm very sensitive to the need to plan and forecast for manufacturing. And this past year, trying to plan during a pandemic was by far one of the most difficult challenges that manufacturers have had. And trying to anticipate the needs and what it looks like to go on during a pandemic and afterwards. So manufacturers globally and throughout Illinois stepped up in amazing ways to meet emergency demands for PPE and for medical equipment, while trying to keep their essential workers safe from COVID-19. It was the most challenging year for manufacturers as well as legislators, trying to stay healthy and trying to stay productive. One of the things that the pandemic made very clear, among other things, is that it's highlighted for us the critical importance of essential workers and of manufacturing in our country. Without really robust manufacturing infrastructure and manpower to produce what we needed, such as PPE and medical equipment, we found ourselves in a bind very early on. We had grown so accustomed to importing so many products that at that time we were really unprepared for a global health crisis. As others, Dave and Tom were talking about things that we needed, just we didn't have, and we had to start quickly manufacturing them, masks and medical equipment. As we continued to administer vaccines to communities across the country, we're seeing the importance of being able to ramp up production so quickly and in high volume to address the demand. So as legislators, we had to test every other day before we could go to the Capitol, and we needed those test tubes with the screw-on tops that Tom was talking about. And they had to be manufactured in large quantities. But in order to make a full recovery from the pandemic and its economic consequences, we have to invest in equitable and a comprehensive workforce and workforce development. One of the things we did in the legislature was to come up with the Illinois Future of Work Act, which created the Future of Work Task Force, and that was a House Bill number 645, you can look it up. It begins a critically important conversation as Illinois contemplates an equitable economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. So this is critical in making sure that we have the workforce that we need and that we have an equitable economic recovery. So policymakers are required to deal with the pandemic recovery while creating good paying jobs. So innovative partnerships between public and private sectors needed to be created, and those are some of the things that the Future of Work Task Force will consider. That task force will combine members of the General Assembly as well as the state directors of education and commerce to study just how to prepare and come back from the pandemic. Not only does our labor force have the power to boost our economic recovery, it's also a really critical component of our moving forward to address climate change and to install green energy infrastructure and manage countless other environmental and health concerns. As the fourth largest manufacturing state, Illinois requires a well-prepared labor force. Over 1,000 Illinois manufacturers showed up and shored up the supply chain for our COVID-19 response. Manufacturers and engineers stepped up and pivoted to redesign their product lines to create and innovate ventilators and PPE. Manufacturers stepped up and met critical demands. One local manufacturer in my district is a manufacturer that made disinfectants and was really able to quickly pivot to producing a massive amount of hand sanitizer and disinfectants to kill coronavirus germs. Not only did they rapidly become a local supplier, but they provided a truck and a driver to deliver donated products to local police and fire departments really early in the pandemic when these products were in such short supply. So manufacturing is vital to Illinois, and Illinois manufacturers responded. So one of the manufacturers we have in Illinois is AbbVie, and they were developing COVID prevention and treatment drugs. Compaq, who supplied packaging for COVID samples taken from patients. And Pioneer Services is another manufacturer, changed their production lines to meet the needs for medical equipment and supplies. I want to remind folks that the industrial sector employs 550,000 men and women in Illinois. And our workers are a top priority here in Illinois. That's why we created the 21st Century Workforce Development Fund Act, which established a grant program for colleges so that local job openings, we could look at what jobs are open and then provide educational and employment shortfalls in manufacturing, healthcare, and innovative technology industries. This program is administered through our Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. The apprenticeship programs have been supported by the state to partner community colleges with on-the-job training to provide apprentices the ability for advancement and stable careers. Illinois also offers a tax credit that incentivizes the expansion of apprenticeship opportunities, which ensure job preparation programs reach residents across Illinois, including in high-need communities. In Springfield, we know there's still work to be done to advance career technical education in the state, and I very much appreciate your advocacy in this area, as do my colleagues in the Senate. One area where manufacturing is directly affected is in the energy sector. Energy costs critically affect manufacturing, and manufacturers consume 1/3 of all energy in the United States, and any changes in energy policy that we make in Illinois have a significant impact. Illinois is home to a variety of promising startups in the data storage, technology, and manufacturing industries. And as an engineer, as well as chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, I'm committed to expanding career and technical education opportunities to create a successful, competitive business climate for years to come. And thanks so much for listening. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate your great insights and the mentioning of some of the policy initiatives that you've supported and that the state of Illinois has promoted to address some of the challenges that manufacturing is facing. We now have a few minutes left for Q&A from the audience. So this will give you a minute to kind of get your questions collected. We do have one question that's come in already. And that question is whether anyone would like to comment about the role that organized labor can play in developing the skill sets that are needed for new manufacturing processes or some of the technologies that are so cutting edge. What role can organized labor play? Who would like to take it?
Senator, go ahead first.
I'll just briefly jump in and say that, there are wonderful apprenticeship programs with the unions in all the trades, and the unions have been pairing up with particular organizations to especially look in underserved areas to try to help work on employment and employing folks from areas that especially need the help. So the unions have been very vigorously working in consort with educational and apprenticeship programs.
And I was going to share the same comment around apprenticeship. I will also add, and building off of one of Tom's comments at the beginning, the technology can be placed anywhere in the globe, and the workforce, not so much. So the way that we work together and convene and build the relationships around the so-called skills gap that has been around in manufacturing for well over a decade. It's a pre-pandemic challenge. It's going to require the ability and the way that we convene and bring all the parties together to work together. And as the senator mentioned, apprenticeship and that kind of work, we're seeing it. It's an important role that organized labor plays in partnership with the companies and other key members of the ecosystem.
And I'll just add on, because I think it does make a lot of sense. So apprenticeships are great. They're for the younger generation and so forth to get them spun up. But I think that we're also seeing with a number of the unions is they're partnering with groups like professional societies or community colleges, where they're not only making sure that the next generation is being trained, but the current generation is being spun up on the latest and greatest technology. So, I think that there's a tremendous synergy there, in particular, in terms of making sure that our workforce is just the best trained across the board, and regardless of what state you're in, but really making sure that our workforce in the United States is the best trained and the highest value added workforce in the world.
Thanks. So since we're talking to policymakers at the state level on the webinar today, and we've heard a lot of talk about new technologies and about vulnerable supply chains in particular, I guess I'd like to put Dave or Tom on the spot first. If you could wave your magic wand and have legislatures enact provisions that would help manufacturers reduce their risk, maybe in investing in new technologies, or engaging in some of the kinds of collaborative and proactive behaviors that we need to reshore, to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Like what would be on your short list of things that you'd like to see legislatures do that would help to promote the kind of behavior that would enhance our national security and mitigate some of the risks we've just lived through?
Sure. I think, at least for me, what I've seen, and I've seen this again, coming out of the White House and so forth. And by the way, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. This is true across the board. Is number one, Mark, you hit on it, security and so forth. So make sure that we're trained up and that our operations do understand how to be cyber secure and so forth. And I think that's something that's readily available. And just make that available. But I think then the other thing is just making sure that we do have access to capital for our small and medium-sized enterprises, because the reality is it does cost something, and it's a great investment. I mean, this is not like we're throwing money out the window. This is an investment, but you need to have access to that capital to move it forward and to allow that new technology and capability to come into place so that we can remain competitive.
And just building on Tom's comments, Mark, you know this productivity, U.S. manufacturing productivity, even pre-pandemic, has been flat or on decline. And so productivity is such an important competitive nature of what we do. It is about the investment in technologies. It's about the investment in skills. So building on Tom's comment, anything that we can do and that we're relative to the investments of technologies, the application of those technologies, the tax credits related to investments, anything we can be doing around the upskilling of the workforce as we're preparing for and building these, the skills needed for the new technologies. It's that blend that's going to bring that trajectory of productivity back forward. I think we've got a lot of policy questions, and I don't know if I know the answers, just around reshoring and around how do we think about supply chains and those decisions. I think there's one role that from a policy standpoint, our leaders can play, which is the convening power of the large manufacturers who are the primary purchasers and the supply chain or the suppliers, getting into those conversations and understanding case by case, what is it going to take to start thinking about locally producing and looking at reshoring production into our country.
Thank you. And Senator Gloriak Hilton, would you like to comment on that from your perspective?
Sure. One of the things that the legislator has done is created laws to allow our Attorney General to be stronger and have more enforcement when it comes to cyber issues, cyber attacks, so that the Attorney General can more easily investigate things that have caused cybersecurity issues. And we're trying to make cybersecurity an actual part of the natural disaster, so we can get our National Guard in to help us or whatever. So that's one thing that we've done as well, is to make cybersecurity part of our disaster program. So the emergency management folks can jump in and help us right away with that.
Great, thank you. Picking up on the cybersecurity theme, we just got a question that came in. It's a two-part question. Let's take the second part first because it's about cyber. What resources are out there to help manufacturers with their cybersecurity requirements that are imposed by the federal government? And Tom, you made some allusion to that before. I know the Department of Defense has made significant investments because of the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. But do you want to talk about resources that are available for companies?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think that there are a couple of approaches here. The first one, of course, is we do have the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes or Manufacturing USA. So if you go to manufacturing, I think it's manufacturing.gov. Mark, you probably do better than I do. It's coming out of Department of Commerce. NIST is running it. But there are two major institutions over there that really have a lot of work in cybersecurity. There's CyMANI, which is CyMANI stands for Cybersecurity Manufacturing Innovation Institute, and that's the Department of Energy Innovation Institute. And then there's also MXD, which is the DoD Digital Manufacturing Institute. CyMANI is based out of San Antonio. In fact, I just got pinged from a colleague over at San Antonio, said he's really liking the program. And then the Digital Manufacturing Institute, of course, is in Senator's home state of Illinois, down there in Chicago on Goose Island. And I think that both of those are really a good focus, in particular for small, medium-sized enterprises, as well as the larger companies. And they would be excellent starting starting points to say, yeah, what do we need to do? How do we need to move things forward? Certainly, if you go to your manufacturing extension partnerships, there's a lot of work going on there. I know NIST, so Department of Commerce has a lot of work going on. So I think you touch base with one of the institutes, you touch base with MEP, actually Department of Energy, Better Plants. So these are all good starting points, and they will be able to send you in the right direction to really help things out.
Dave, do you want to add anything to that?
I think, Tom, you've covered it well. And serving as the Manufacturing Extension Partnership in Illinois, I do encourage connecting with local, because that's the local kind of boots on the ground that's going to help with the small manufacturers and be able to help facilitate as well those connections to the institutes that Tom mentioned.
Great, thank you. I believe we're just about at the top of the hour here and want to be respectful of folks' time. Emily, do you want to take it over here and provide any closing remarks?
Sure thing, Mark. Thank you so much for your wonderful moderating throughout this webinar. And I want to give a special thanks to our speakers for your insight. It was really valuable to hear that both the national perspective and the on the ground perspective of kind of where manufacturing was at, how it pivoted, and what it looks like for the future. So we had a few great questions that came in from the audience. And if you do have additional questions or concerns, I'll drop my email in the chat box in a moment here. Please feel free to reach out to me directly and I can get in touch with any of the speakers. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our partners at the Holdings Manufacturing Extension Partnership for your continued support and for the support of this webinar. And of course, a big thank you to our participants for joining us here today for this discussion. We will have the recording of this webinar and the slides posted to our webpage in the coming days for you to check out in case you're interested. So thank you again and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.